2023-24 में जीडीपी विकास दर 8% के पार हो गया है।
चौथी तिमाही में जीडीपी 7.8% रही है। इस वक्त की बड़ी खबर आपको बता रहे हैं और ये आंकड़े जो आए हैं उसके मुताबिक भारत की आर्थिक विकास दर 8.
What is GDP? How does GDP provide an idea on country's growth? What, why, and how to understand GDP for this video? Hello friends, you might be hearing that the government, the financial institutes, and other business personalities keeps talking about GDP. How India's GDP growth is extremely well on track. And basis this, the world sees India's growth to be tremendously well. That's okay, but the main question here is, what is GDP? How does GDP provide an idea on country's growth? So, welcome to Unbox Success once again. And guess what? Today we will unbox how GDP works, what is GDP, and how GDP affects you and me. This three-letter acronym GDP might sound a little boring initially, but believe me guys, once you understand GDP, you will know the importance of it. We will be majorly talking around what, why, and how to understand GDP for this video. So let's start with what. What is GDP? First and foremost, GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. It is one of the most widely used measures of an economy's output or production. In simple words, GDP is defined as the total value of goods and services produced within a country's border within a specific time period. The time period can be monthly, quarterly, or annual. Let me explain you with an example. Assume that you stay in an imaginary country called Asgard. Now, in Asgard, there are three main sectors: agriculture, manufacturing, and services. The agricultural sector includes crops grown by farmers. Manufacturing includes factories in Asgard where goods like cars, electronics, and clothing are produced. And the services sector includes spending on services like healthcare and education. Now, let's assume that the total value of crops grown in an year is 100 rupees, the total value of goods produced is 500 rupees, and the spending on services such as healthcare and education is 300 rupees. Now, to calculate the GDP of Asgard, simply add up these three components. So that will give us agriculture plus manufacturing plus services, which is 100 plus 500 plus 300, which is 900 rupees. So the GDP of Asgard can be considered as 900 rupees. Now, when we consider inflation for this calculation, it is called real GDP. I assume now you have a very clear idea on what GDP is. Now, coming to the second part, why? Why is GDP important for a country? You will already have an idea on why GDP is important. See, when GDP increases, it positively impacts people's life. GDP helps government decide how much to spend on public services and if taxes needs to be increased or decreased. If a country's GDP grows steadily, people earn more and spend more. Hence, they can be expected to pay more taxes. So, the government gets more tax money from people and uses this money to improve public services. Friends, I think now you know why GDP is important for a country. Now, let's go to how. How will GDP affect your life, country's growth, and how does the cycle work? As I mentioned, when GDP increases, people earn more and spend more. So it is a positive sign. But what if GDP drops? A particular cycle starts when a country's GDP starts going down. If GDP doesn't grow, the demand or consumption will drop and thus it will affect the normal business income. The reduction in average business income will lower the new job opportunities. This is because it will pay its employees only when a business is performing well. Otherwise, businesses will start to lay off their workers and this reduces the workers' average income. This cycle ends up by affecting the per capita income of the country. That is why it is said that the high per capita income can help a common man lead to a better quality of life. If the GDP growth rate goes below the labor force growth rate, then no new jobs will be created. Thus, the unemployment rate will increase. In such an unfortunate situation, the poor are affected the most because the economic gap between the rich and poor increases. So, to tackle this economic gap, sustained growth is essential to minimize poverty. On an average, if there is a 1% increase in per capita income, poverty will reduce by 1.7% and the overall living standard of a common man will increase. So, until now, you will have a good idea on what is GDP, why is it important, and how it affects the country's growth and our lifestyle. Now, lastly, let me tell you how government's action on GDP drop hits a common man's life. As I mentioned, when GDP drops, the per capita income lowers, and when per capita income lowers, the tax revenue for the government also reduces. So, to fulfill the economic crisis, government starts to take debt from the private sector. The private sector demands high interest rate, so the government's debt interest increases. The amount available to invest in public infrastructure decreases. This, in turn, will stop the government to invest in infrastructure. So overall, a healthy growth rate of GDP is a sign to a good growth of a country. I hope that you got an idea on what is GDP and how does it work. Thanks again guys. If you like the content, please like, comment and subscribe to get such accurate and on-point insights.